I think we've started recording. I don't know if you have to. I don't know if you receive a notification for that.
I just heard something that said it was recording.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so we just started recording. So with that, we'll get started.
Okay.
So today is May 6th. I'm with Officer Josh Miller. He is an officer in the Eau Claire Police Department. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how COVID-19 has affected him, his employment, and his community. And so with that, I guess I'll ask you some questions, Officer Miller, just to get to know you better.
Sure.
So how long have you been an officer?
I've been an officer for about 11 and a half years now.
Okay. And what made you want to be an officer in the first place?
Oh, that's kind of a tough one. I started when I was young. I wanted to be an officer. I guess I don't know where it really kind of came from initially. Went to school for it. I went on to State University. Kind of decided partway through that I may not want to be an officer.
Mhm.
So I kind of switched it up. Eventually, at a kind of a later age, when I was about 33, I decided maybe I wanted to try it again. So I started applying. Eventually, got hired here. So it was kind of a calling from a young age. Then I got away from it. Then sort of just naturally gravitated back to it.
Okay, cool. And could you give us like a brief job description of what you do?
Yeah, so I started out working patrol like everyone does. I worked
Mhm.
patrol for 5 years before I moved to detectives, where I was a sensitive crimes detective. So I
Oh.
investigated crimes against kids, be it physical abuse, drug endangered kids, juvenile sexual assaults, you name it. Um, and did that for just over 4 years before I slid over to public information officer, which is
Mhm.
what I do now. I've been here for about 2 years, and that is kind of community outreach, social media, media relations, kind of a catch-all for anything having to do with public information, community relations, that sort of thing.
Wow, you must have had a really fun time these past couple months then.
It's been interesting.
Yeah, actually, I would like to actually jump into that then with your in employment. So, as you obviously know, there's been a pandemic for a couple of the past months. And so during that time, has your job, dealing with social media and whatnot, has it become easier, harder, or stayed the same?
It's that's kind of a difficult question to answer. Overall, it's been more difficult. The only reason that I would say easier is because when the pandemic was kind of at its height, we sort of made the conscious decision that we were going to scale back our social media efforts a little bit.
Mhm.
Simply because our philosophy here has always been we want to highlight what our officers do. We want to educate the public as to what our officers do on a day-to-day basis, recognize their good work, but we also had a lot of fun doing it. We make like fun videos. We try to keep a little bit of a sense of humor in it. But with the pandemic and the hardships that people were going through, it wasn't always, we felt appropriate to put that kind of thing out on social media. So we really kind of scaled back with that just because we realized that the times were difficult for a lot of people and we didn't want to really be kind of jumping around having a good time while everybody is really suffering. So in that sense, we scaled back our content, but we really took a closer look at what material we were putting out there just to kind of be, I guess, more sympathetic, more empathetic to what people were going through. So we really had a lot more scrutiny about what we were doing. As before, we could kind of ad lib a little bit and just put out what we thought was fun, but it really required a lot more attention and kind of thought before we put something out, really looking at it from every possible angle. How are people going to take this? Are they going to be offended? Are they going to be, just thinking we should be spending our time better or what have you? So that made it a little bit more difficult. Um, and then in my particular job, the community relations aspect of it was really different simply because there wasn't any community events going on. We try to have a really strong public presence in Eau Claire, meaning if there's an event going on, some sort of kids expo or anything like that, we'll try to get an officer down there if we can. And if that's not the case, if those events just aren't going on, we don't have as many options to get out there and meet people, let kids look at the squad cars, let kids talk to us, talk with our community members. There's just not anything like that going on. So we really had to scale that back, not by a choice, but just because of necessity.
Okay. And I guess like how have you like how have you or your department reacted to that? Because I know for police officers, being a part of the community and interacting with the community is important, very important part. I'm sure it's something you guys very much enjoy doing.
Right.
So like, has it been like have cops been like reacting negatively to that? They wish they could talk with the community more, instead of being maybe stuck in an office all day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. For me, especially, that's the reason that I took this job, was to
Mhm.
kind of get out there and meet people. And like I said, educate them about what we do and kind of put the human face to the badge a little bit. So it certainly makes it a challenge. And especially when there were so many questions about how are police going to be the ones to enforce the pandemic protocols and the rules. So we were, again, very measured in how we would go about doing that. But yeah, when the public events that we show up, say like the Easter egg hunt in Carson Park, I mean, everyone's happy to see us then. They're not always happy to see us on patrol, because usually we're showing up when people are having their worst days. So it's nice to get out to some of those other events. I think about like the suicide walk that they do in Carson Park every year. That was really a very positive experience for the officers that attend that. And just not being able to do that was really kind of, I know a lot of people missed out on that.
I gotcha. Thank you. And you're talking about being like very careful in what you guys publish through social media. Do you
Right.
have like any examples you could share?
I personally remember doing a tweet not too long into the lockdown, just kind of offering suggestions on what people can do to maybe make themselves feel better. And we got a lot of negative comments about it. It ran the gamut for a lot of different reasons. And it just made me think, like, I was really just trying to say something positive in the way you can just kind of help yourself through the pandemic. And
Mhm.
people did not take kindly to it. And I didn't fully understand it at the time. I think I do more now, but it was a little shocking, and kind of just the anger I think that people were feeling. And I don't necessarily think it was directed at the police department or at the Eau Claire Police Department. There was just a lot of, I think, fear and trepidation about what was going on.
I gotcha. Yeah, it definitely does sound difficult.
Sure.
You're trying to interact on social media, but as you said, there's a lot of anger going on. So even if
Absolutely.
you have the best of intentions, something it.
Absolutely. And we've always known that we're a police department. We understand how we're perceived to some extent. So there's not much we can post that's going to be universally loved or accepted or anything.
Mhm.
But even more so now, we have to be extra careful with that.
Okay, yeah, and in terms of like COVID-19, has it like what precautions is your department taking with COVID-19? Like for example, what happens if an officer, unfortunately gets it?
Yeah, we've had officers exposed to COVID and have got COVID. So we follow our city and county health guidelines as far as them quarantining and not being able to go back to work after a certain period of time and they're not showing symptoms or anything. But we really had to look at a lot of the ways that we were responding to calls. I know that our communications center added and still has questions just that they ask in any call that they're going to send an officer to about, has the person been exposed to COVID? Are they showing any symptoms? Do they have a mask available? Things like that. So that was added right away. Then we started really directing callers to our online self-report forms, or if this is something that we don't necessarily have to send an officer to, can they just go online, fill out a form? Basically, it's a police report. They fill out their report, and that gets forwarded to an officer to follow up with at a later time. So that was very helpful. We started pushing a lot of calls there just to avoid the person-to-person contact. We also would try to do as many calls as we could via telephone, which sounds a little bit silly. You expect to call police and have an officer show up. But if there's like a criminal damage case, like a vandalism, and we didn't have to send an officer there, we would call the complainant. They'd say, yeah, my mailbox got smashed. Maybe they could take some pictures and email it to the officer and do it all that way. So it's really kind of a different way of handling the calls that we get. Certainly, we're still responding to the more, I guess, hot calls, you would say, where we need an immediate response. But that scaled back initially quite a bit.
Gotcha. And earlier you talked about like a lot of the anger going on. Has there been like an increase like misdemeanor crimes or things like that? Have people been lashing out as a result?
We started running our crime stats fairly soon in the pandemic just to get a sense of everything. And
Mhm.
there was overall things stayed fairly level. I expected to see a big drop. I think everyone expected to see a big drop, and we didn't really see that. Initially, some of the crimes you saw were a lot less, like maybe your bar fights or things like that. And that's simply because the bars weren't open. We
Right.
saw a drop in OWIs initially, and that's because bars weren't open. People, if they're drinking, were generally doing it at home more. So some of those did decrease, but we saw others that were more of an increase. I want to say our fraud calls might have gone up, which is not surprising. But overall, it leveled out. We weren't any less busy during the real heavy days of the pandemic. We just saw kind of maybe a different type of call, and certainly a difference in how we handled calls.
Okay, gotcha. And you were talking about the bars being closed down. So I'd like to shift this to like you personally. Has this affected your free time anyway? Because for example, I know some people are very extroverted. They like to go out a lot.
Sure.
Go to the bar, for example. But if the bars are closed, there's nothing you can do. So I guess like for you, what do you like to do in your free time, and has that been impacted by COVID-19 regulations?
Yeah, so I'm a homebody by nature. I like to go out occasionally, but I'm not a bar fly or anything. But I do have some friends that we would occasionally go out to a local bar. Maybe a couple times a month or something like that. I haven't been out with them in over a year. So just because we're not entirely comfortable going out, even with some of the restrictions lifted. But I personally, I didn't mind staying at home a little bit more. Maybe it's just my nature, but for what it did affect for me was my kids were heavy into sports. So we got baseball canceled for a year. I mean, we could have played, but we opted not to. So my son just played baseball here last night, and that was the first organized baseball game he played in 2 years. So that really affected him. And then just being able to get out with friends was a big thing for them, birthday parties and things like that. So we tried to do our best with what we could to keep them entertained and keep them happy. But yeah, we at the time we were a host family for the Eau Claire Express. We've been a host family for, I want to say, 3 years. And then the pandemic hit. We were all set to have 2 players come in from Stanford, and we found out kind of last minute that no, there wasn't going to be a season. So that kind of changed everything for us. So that was kind of one of our family things, was to go to the Express game. We were there almost every night for a home game to see our players play. And without that, it was just like, well, I guess we're staying at home again tonight. So it definitely affected us. We got a lot more family time, which was good to some extent, but stressful to some other extent. But we managed through it. But yeah, it was a big effect, even for someone maybe a little more introverted like myself.
Gotcha. And with any of your friends or even family, has anyone been diagnosed with COVID-19?
Yeah, we've had people here diagnosed with it. I'm trying to think. I don't think anyone in my immediate close family got it, thankfully. But yeah, certainly people at work that have gotten it, they managed through it. A lot had, they had some symptoms, but nobody had anything serious, thankfully.
Gotcha. And do you remember what like those symptoms were?
I don't. I mean, I think a lot of people said it was generally more of your typical kind of a strong cold, strong flu sort of thing.
Gotcha. And so we were talking about your family. Now, how about your neighborhood? How has that been affected by COVID-19?
My neighborhood, I don't think it's affected it. Well, I'm not going to speak for my neighbors, of course, but
right.
we before everyone really understood what COVID was, there was a lot of fear. So, the kids weren't going out in the neighborhood, even and playing with the neighbors. They would talk to each other through the window. And we're fortunate that my sons have one of their best friends lives about 2 doors down. So that was a little tough that they couldn't get out with them right away. They're talking through windows and whatnot. But as they kind of learned a little bit more about what COVID was and how it affects people, we opened that up a little bit. We trusted the neighbors. We knew that they took it seriously, and they were following a lot of the protocols. So we just kind of made a decision that the mental health of the kids was worth any risk that they might have just from running around in the yard shooting Nerf guns at each other. So overall, like I said, I'm sure each neighbor, it affected them differently, but we kind of just found a new normal, I guess.
Gotcha. And I guess how do your kids react to that new normal?
Well, they were certainly happy to do the online learning. They enjoyed the virtual stuff because they got to stay home a lot more.
Right.
Even though I'm not convinced that they learned as well as they certainly could have if they were in school, but they got used to that pretty fast. They enjoyed it. They missed seeing their friends, obviously, but we tried to keep them engaged through even just playing video games online. They did a lot of that and could talk to their friends that way. So I said for my youngest son, he was a big sports guy. That's what affected him the most, was missing out on his team sport. So that was kind of a bummer. But I think my oldest became an expert at Fortnite. So maybe that'll be something that he can turn into a career someday. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's a whole new world.
Yeah, right. Who knows? They give scholarships for that now. So
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that. Maybe there'll be like a high school esports team for Fortnite.
they had actually talked about having an esport team in Altoona. It never came around, unfortunately. But hey, whatever you can do, I guess.
Yeah, I guess actually speaking about that, how do you feel about there seems to be a more of a transition from like I guess real life to the virtual world.
Sure.
Like I guess like how would you juxtapose that with your own childhood? When you were growing up, I'm sure there wasn't as many electronic devices.
You're calling me old, aren't you?
I'm just
Yeah.
making an assumption there, but
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Like my kids will sit down and play video games with friends, that they normally don't get to see. And that just wasn't something that I had as a kid. If you wanted to play video games with your friends, you got on your bike and you rode 5 miles to the neighbors and sat down with them and had a sleepover. And they can't even fathom that right now. They don't understand what that could be like. But taking away some of the dangers of it, I think it's great that kids can just hop online and talk to friends, or they can collaborate via Zoom on a school project or something. I think that takes a lot of the hassle out of it for them. So, well, like I said, there's the dangers there of kids being online, and the education factor is a huge component of that. We talk to our kids regularly about that, monitor who they're talking to online. So it opens up a lot of doors, not all of them good, but if you kind of empower your kids, I think, to make the right choices, it's a huge learning tool, huge social tool that can really help.
Gotcha. And I guess going back to your childhood again, if COVID-19 happened during your childhood, how do you think your neighborhood or your family or even you would have reacted to it?
Yeah, I've actually thought about that. We lived out on an old farmhouse outside of Chautauqua, so we were pretty isolated to begin with. I'm not naive enough to say that it wouldn't have affected us, but we just weren't as social back then. We didn't have as much organized team sports. We didn't have the kind of the get-togethers that a lot of people have now. So if I'm being honest, I don't think it would have changed a whole heck of a lot for us. I will say it'd be hard to get food, because now, you could just DoorDash anything you want and have a great meal delivered to you. That would have been a challenge back then. But yeah, overall, I think we would have managed fine. It'd be different if we were living in a city, but out in the country, I think we would have, it would have been just a small wave to ride.
Gotcha. Any idea of how, because you said you thought about how your family would react.
Sure.
Any idea how a city would react?
How what?
How a city would react,
Oh my
during your
gosh.
childhood?
Well-
I've never been there. I'm a young man,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't know.
That's to be honest, Andrew, I don't even know that I could speculate. I was a country guy from the time I was born, really. So I'm not familiar with what city life was like back then. So I
Gotcha.
can't even imagine what it would be like for them.
All right. And you talk about like your youngest son, doing sports. I guess
Yep.
What kind of sports does he do? Are a lot of them like team sports?
Yeah, he's a big basketball guy, big baseball guy. He decided football wasn't for him. He tried cross country. That wasn't for him, which was nice because cross country they could actually do a little bit. So they got some races in. But yeah, he's a big basketball and baseball guy.
Gotcha. If I remember correctly, you said you organized with other families a game recently.
I think what we just did is we talked with our neighbors about being able to get the kids together during.
Gotcha. That hasn't happened yet then.
Yeah, well, it had. We let them. They run around in the neighborhood and play. Our kids generally don't go into their neighbor's house without permission, and neighbors don't come into our house without permission. But neighbors have a trampoline. We've got a yard where they can mess around and shoot baskets and stuff. So long as they're being decent about everything, we're fine with that.
Do you have any plans in the near future to set up an organized team game?
Like for our boys or?
Yeah, or for your boys or just for with the community in general?
No, I don't think so. We're back to like the regular Altoona baseball league and all that. So our youngest is taking part in that. The oldest is on the tennis team in high school. So
Mhm.
we're going that route.
Gotcha. And I guess like what precautions are they taking with that? Like do players have to wear masks while they're up to
So
bat?
yeah, so when he played basketball this past winter, all the players were in masks. They limited the number of people that could come to the games. We had to drive quite a ways for games because there just wasn't many gyms that were even allowing it. I think we drove all the
Mhm.
way to Owen Withy for one game to sit there for 45 minutes and then go back. And even then, I think that some parents had to sit in the car because they just wouldn't were only allowing one or two guests per kid. So it was kind of tough that not everyone that wanted to come see their niece, nephew, grandson, son even play basketball could do it. Especially when they're limiting the number of games so much, you really want to be there in those limited opportunities, but not everyone could. So it made it tough. But yeah, the kids had to wear masks. It was tough. They're out there, sweating and breathing hard, and it was a challenge for it for sure. Nobody liked it, but I think everyone understood that if they wanted to play basketball, this is what they're going to have to do.
Gotcha. And everyone like understands how serious COVID-19 is right now.
Oh,
But
100%.
like when it was first coming out, when we first started hearing news report about it, how did you react to it?
Well, it's a good question. There was so much, I guess, question about it. I tried to sort of reserve judgment, and the way I always say it is that we don't like being second guessed in our jobs.
Mhm.
So I wasn't particularly keen on second guessing the doctors. So I was just going to kind of wait and hear what they had to say and kind of go by their recommendations. So I tried to not think about it too much or draw any kind of early conclusions, but my instinct was always just to let the experts take a look at it and come up with a solution and some plans.
When the experts started saying this was a big deal, were you like completely on board with it?
Yeah,
Or
100%. Yeah, definitely. There was a lot of steps that had to be taken that weren't easy for anyone.
Mhm.
But until they could get a grasp on everything, I personally, and this is just me speaking as a human being, not as
Mhm.
an officer or anything, but
Sure.
yeah, I understood tough decisions had to be made, and until we could get a grasp on it, they had to be made.
Did your boys react the same way?
I think so. Yeah, my youngest especially, he's pretty nervous about COVID, even though he's probably young enough to not be bothered by it. But
Mhm.
he's very leery about people not wearing masks. He always comments on it when he sees it out in public, and he is a stickler for wearing his. So
Mhm.
whatever makes him feel better, I'm down with.
Okay, gotcha. And I think that's for the most part all the questions I had.
Okay.
So I guess we do have a couple more minutes left. Is there anything else you like to add? Like any thoughts you have about the pandemic in general, or
Well, I mean, I just kind of been asked this by a media outlet recently, and I think it's worth bringing up because I think it
Mhm.
will end up being a problem, and that's just from my time in sensitive crimes. A lot of our reports on child abuse or sexual assault, things like that, came from like an outside witness or like a third party, typically the school system.
Right?
A lot of times, a child might confide to an adult at school, a teacher, a counselor, something that happened to them at home. And that's where we got
Mhm.
a lot of our reports. We don't go looking for those kind of things because
Right.
you just
I'm
can't.
sure it's hard to track down too.
Absolutely right. And children will generally disclose when they're ready. You can't force them to talk about something that's happened to them. And I really do have some concerns about what was happening to kids who didn't have that outlet,
Mhm.
who were getting abused and simply didn't have an opportunity to go to school and have a teacher see a bruise or, to have a talk in class about sexual assault. And then that's when a child discloses. So I do kind of fear for possible wave of reports when kids come back to school full time. I hope we don't see it, but like I said, from what I've seen in sensitive crimes, is something that certainly concerns me. But yeah, I fear for what happened to kids in bad situations during the pandemic.
Gotcha. And do you feel like because you've been in that sensitive department for a couple of years now.
Yep.
Do you think there's any solutions to that?
Um, sadly, I don't know what a solution could be. Like I said, most kids will disclose when they feel safe to do so. And if they're still in those situations for a long period of time, I can't imagine that they will feel safe enough to disclose. So I think it's just important that human services and departments are prepared to handle the caseload when it comes in. I feel our department is. I know not every city or county has the resources, but I certainly hope that as we come out of this, that those kind of resources are at least available and in place.
And we'll definitely see what the future holds.
Absolutely.
And with that, Officer Miller, I think that's the end of our interview.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. You have a very nice day.
All right. You as well. Take care.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.